Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, found himself in a strange new world in the early 1960s. It wasn't the changing music scene that shook him up, though that was big, but something far more personal and confusing. In 1963, Elvis had just finished making a movie called Viva Las Vegas. It wasn't his greatest film, but it had its moments, especially the music. He had worked with greats like Ann-Margret, and they seemed to click on screen, yet the songs in the movie were a letdown. They felt more like they belonged on Broadway than in a film. Despite this, Viva Las Vegas would later be seen as a classic, but back then it was a flop at first. Elvis's manager, the infamous Colonel Parker, was not happy. He blamed Ann-Margret for taking too many scenes, pushing up costs and reducing profits. The Colonel told MGM, Elvis's studio, that the film should focus on Elvis, not Ann-Margret. Elvis was embarrassed by this interference but didn't say much. He hurried back to Memphis but couldn't shake off thoughts about Ann-Margret and another woman, Priscilla. Things got even more complicated when Elvis and Priscilla were shooting a movie called Kissin' Cousins. This was no fancy affair, it was a quick, low-budget project. Elvis played two roles, singing and acting his way through the story. It wasn't great, but it highlighted a growing problem for Elvis. He was torn between Priscilla and Ann-Margret. He didn't know if he could love two women, or if Priscilla was just a fling from his time in Hollywood. As this internal struggle played out, Elvis couldn't ignore a bigger change brewing in the music world. The Beatles had arrived. At first, it seemed funny to Elvis, these young British lads with their unusual hair and mannerisms. But as the Beatles took over the airwaves and charts, he felt a pang of jealousy and unease. The Beatles weren't just a band, they were a phenomenon. Everyone, from kids to grown-ups, was falling for them. Elvis, who had once been the undisputed king, now felt like a relic from the past. The Beatles' success was more than just music. They had a charm and energy that captivated the nation. Their British accents and playful banter were a breath of fresh air. Elvis watched from the sidelines, feeling the heat of competition. The world had changed, and Elvis wasn't sure if he could keep up. As Elvis watched the Beatles on television, he found himself thinking about how different their path to fame was from his own. He admired their energy and the way they seemed to enjoy themselves while performing. Elvis remembered when he first heard the Beatles, wondering who the lead singer was. He had always thought of himself as the star, but the Beatles showed him a different way. All four members were stars. Elvis tried to understand their music. While his band in Nashville was very skilled, he wondered if the Beatles were more innovative. Yes, they were. They reminded him of the Everly Brothers, but the Beatles had their own unique sound. Their early songs had rough harmonies, but they showed a real enthusiasm that was infectious. Elvis liked their first records, especially I Saw Her Standing There. What really struck Elvis was that the Beatles were not just pretty faces. Like him, they played and sang their own songs. They covered songs by American legends like Little Richard and Chuck Berry, showing they knew their craft. Elvis knew the Beatles were more than just a cute band of long-haired English boys. They were talented musicians who wrote their own hits. As the Beatles became popular, Elvis couldn't help but notice a shift in music. Their songs had a different rhythm, slower and more focused on a steady beat, unlike the fast, danceable songs Elvis used to make. This change made Elvis question if his own music was still suitable for dancing. The kids loved the Beatles' music, and Elvis began to wonder if his songs were still as catchy. Around the same time, Elvis had a song ready to record called Memphis, Tennessee. It was a song many bands played, and Elvis felt it was one of his best rock and roll recordings since a hit a year before. However, he hesitated to release it. He feared it might get lost among the Beatles' overwhelming popularity. Elvis played the song for friends, including Johnny Rivers, who already had a hit with the same song. Rivers released his version first, and it quickly became number one. Elvis was frustrated but didn't rush to release his version. He knew the music business was competitive. Instead, he put the song aside for later. Meanwhile, another movie project, Roustabout, kept him busy. As he read the script, he tried to remind himself that he was a film star and the Beatles were just a pop group. But seeing the Beatles dominate the charts with 5 singles and 2 albums at the top made him angry. In the studio, Elvis's patience wore thin. When asked to record with the Jordanaires for a song in his new movie, he snapped at the director when they discussed the arrangement. Elvis felt trapped, stuck in a cycle of making movies that weren't challenging. Despite his frustration with the music industry and his film roles, Elvis's faith remained strong. He often shared Bible stories with his friends, amusing them with his enthusiasm. Yet with his sudden fame, he couldn't help but wonder why he had become so famous. Was it luck or something more? He thought about his faith, wondering if God had a special reason for choosing him. But he also considered that it might just be a combination of factors: being in the right place at the right time, speaking English, and the unique cultural mix of his hometown. Elvis knew that his success was unusual, but he couldn't fully explain why he was where he was. Some might say it was just luck, but he often felt there was more to it than that. In the mid-1960s, Elvis was lost in a world of his own making, far removed from the music that once made him famous. Each movie he made felt like a step backward. His songs were no longer the catchy tunes that made people want to dance and sing along. Instead, they were part of movie soundtracks that nobody really paid attention to. Elvis felt stuck. He was away from his fans for too long, and without the stage, he lost his edge. Think of it like a sports star who hasn't played in years. The skills start to rust and the crowd's cheers fade away. That's what was happening to Elvis. He tried to make new songs, but they didn't feel right. They lacked the spark that made his earlier hits so special. One song, "It Hurts Me," showed how lost he was. It was a sad song, deep and heartfelt, but it got lost among other not-so-great songs from a movie called Girl Happy. It's like trying to shout in a noisy room, no one hears you. Another film, Harum Skarum, had him playing a singing sheik, but it wasn't the role that showcased his true talent. Songs like Petunia the Gardener's Daughter for the movie Frankie and Johnny were just okay, nothing special. Elvis was frustrated. He looked at the scripts for new movies and realized they were following the same tired patterns. Each story was basically the same as the last, just with different names. It was like reading a book where every chapter repeats the same story. This made him feel small and out of control. During this time, Elvis also dabbled in something new and different. He became interested in spiritual and metaphysical ideas. It's like finding a new hobby that takes your mind off things. He visited places like the Self-Realization Fellowship, a group that teaches about inner peace and self-realization. He even tried LSD, a drug that changes how you see and feel the world, after reading about it in a book by Timothy Leary. His friends and family were worried. His father, Vernon, was especially upset. He saw Elvis's new interests as a waste of time and money. The Colonel, Elvis's manager, was even more alarmed. He thought Elvis was being brainwashed and feared for his client's sanity. Despite his spiritual explorations, Elvis's music career was on a downward path. He felt disconnected from his music and his fans. It was a hard time for him, a mix of confusion and searching. Just when it seemed like he couldn't find his way, a wise woman named Sridaya Mata offered some guidance. She told Elvis that giving up his music to spread spiritual teachings wasn't what God had planned for him. This helped him realize he still had a role to play, even if it wasn't clear what that was. In the end, Elvis's journey through the mid-1960s was one of lost direction and searching. Like many of us, he struggled with finding his path. But even in the darkest times, there's always a chance for a new beginning.